Welcome, flip-flop fans. This is a video that was pre-recorded, and I had done a voiceover at the time, but I got real frustrated and it was hard to listen to myself, so I'm doing a voiceover of this. Now what this is a Copal 101, and a member of flip-flop fans wanted me to look at a Copal 222 on how to replace the bulb, but I had already replaced the bulb in that clock. This is somewhat different than a Copal 222, and you can see this is a fiberglass tube that's been impregnated with some resin, so it's different than what you're going to see normally. They usually use like a PVC type tubing. See, this one's got some breaks in it. The bulb is all blackened. So my intent was to show you how to replace the bulb, just replacing the bulb. Well, the spoiler alert, I wasn't able to do that. But what you've got to do, if you can do that, is you've got to push the tube back, and hopefully the tube isn't so long that it stops you from pushing it back, and get access to the wires that you can unsolder, and then replace the bulb and replace the resistor. So I'm going to show you some of this to see if it doesn't make sense as I start working on this. But it's kind of difficult, and you know, in reality, I think it'd be better just to go ahead and kind of redo the whole thing. You can kind of reuse tubing sometimes, a lot of times, but you'll have to cut it off in the back there and get access to it. So I know that may not be making much sense, but this whole tube situation here, you're going to have to kind of get loose, cut it loose, and get access to all the internals in there so that you can get the bulb put in correctly and safely. So on almost every Copal mechanism, you've got the bulb being held in place by a metal band, and this is aluminum and it bends. You don't want to overbend it because you're going to use that again, of course. So we've got our bulb loose, and this is crispy. It's just crunching. You can see our two nuts in the back here, and sometimes, well, see, that's not going to work. Sometimes on the plastic tubing, you can break it loose of the bulb, hopefully without breaking the bulb and hurting yourself, and slide that tubing back, and then you wouldn't have to take those nuts off and unloosen the wires. I'm going to show you how to take those nuts off here in a second. So if this was the plastic tubing, I would kind of take a tool, and push it back off of the bulb, and then sometimes it'll loosen off. Remember, this has been on here for 40 plus years, and it's not working in this case. So this is not something I would try to salvage or reuse, because it's just a mess. It was doing its purpose, though. It was insulating and protecting. And you can see here you got an old resistor, and it's using it's a 3-band resistor, and you can look up those codes, the red, green, and yellow. It's missing the 4th band, which isn't necessary to calculate it, but it's a 250K resistor. Now, that's a big honking resistor, and that bulb, I don't know what type bulb that is. I can't find it. It's a huge bulb, but you don't need a bulb of that size. The bulbs we're going to use to replace this are smaller, but they put out a significant amount of light, and it just uses a 30K resistor for use on household current in the United States. So easy to get, and that's just what I use. So you see these nuts here in the back that holds this on to the power are crimped on. So, and you can see there's not enough room to push the tube back if this was a plastic tube, and the resin tube here is all broken. So I'm just going to have to replace this whole mess, and that's the safest way to go, actually. So here's these two things here. I have in the past tried to uncrimp them, but ultimately I end up cutting them anyway. So you get my stuff ready. There's my 2 screw nuts, little tiny ones. So you see there's that indentation there. Like I said, I've tried to uncrimp that in the past, and it's not successful, but I still keep trying. I should probably use some better pliers to do that, to get some power there, but it doesn't work anyway. So ultimately I just go ahead and cut it off. Now we're losing some of our wires here, and that becomes a problem because we don't have a lot of wire to work with. I'm going to show you in a minute here. It depends on your configuration. Every clock's a little different, but this one has a black thing that holds the wire in place. You'll get a better look of it here in a minute. And you have to undo that and give yourself some more slack. We can get a little more slack off the motor wire, perhaps, and we can definitely get more slack off the power cord. But I don't really want to mess up that motor wire. It's doing fine in its old fiberglass tubing. So I'm struggling with this a little bit, as you can see, trying to preserve some of them wires, but it's not good. It's not doing much good. So you can see I don't have a whole lot to work with there, and I'm going to have to strip those wires to be able to get the bulb back on there. So that's the struggle there. We'll get it done eventually. So I've gotten the other one off. You can see I've definitely got this the wires from the motor. They've got to be stripped back. The power cord has to be stripped back so that I can get it connected again. And then we've got to get our bulb situated so that it makes sense. Now in a previous video, the one just prior to this one, I showed how to make a bulb. But if you've just got what you're dealing with, like I said, the tubing, you can reuse that, or you can get some shrink wrap. And you really don't have to use this kind of tubing. I should have made that point. You can use shrink wrap as long as you shrink wrap everything that needs to be separated. So you don't have to go old style, and you could save a lot of money that way. Again, most people aren't going to see this stuff on the inside. What I'm doing here is I'm looking to see if there isn't a small little inner tube that I could recycle and use on this case that's just jammed up in there. And I ultimately come to the conclusion I can't use any of that stuff. That's the little small tube that was stuck in there, but it was to insulate the wire part, not where the resistor is, the other part. There's nothing in there. So this stuff is just worthless to me. So what I do ultimately is I just rebuild a whole thing so that we can have a working light. But like I said, I don't know that I would even recommend that people go in there and try to just get the bulb in. Again, if you just put the bulb in and use the old resistor, it's likely to be the wrong resistor, which would be why your light's going to be kind of dim, especially if you used a 250K resistor when it called for a 30K resistor. It won't hurt anything. You're just going to have a dim bulb. So you see, we just got to go new here. So the next part of this video is just me kind of going through again how to make these bulbs, or how to work with them. And really the video I showed you before probably does a better job of showing how to connect things, how to solder and all that stuff. So I'm not going to show the rest of this, because that's all the rest of this video is me kind of putting it all together, which is kind of pointless. The main thing is when you're doing this, you've got to make sure that nothing's going to touch. If you're not an electrician, you're not used to doing this, I can't emphasize how important this is. You could have a short circuit, and you could have a house fire. I mean, in worst case scenario. That's why I do like using that stuff that I used, because it's top-notch, high-quality stuff. It's what they call self-extinguishing, which means even if it did blaze a little bit, call it fire, it would put itself out. Usually if you have a short that bad, it's going to trip a circuit breaker, but even if it don't, it's eventually just going to burn until the wires lose contact, and hopefully doesn't mess anything up. So again, like I was saying, I'm using shrink wrap on this one. You could use another tube of shrink wrap on the other, as long as it fit, and then put maybe a big black or whatever color of thicker, wider shrink wrap over the both of them to hold everything together, as long as nothing's touching, and that would work great. In fact, I've opened clocks and that's what someone had done, and I didn't know until I opened the clock. So again, most important thing is that you get all the wire leads covered with some kind of tubing or wrap. when wrapping up the resistor. That's not going to cause any problem. But in this case, I do have the plastic tube. And again, like you may have recycled it off of the old one. This is a new one. And as long as it's functional and it's going to serve the purpose, go ahead and reuse it. So the rest of this video, I'm going to kind of fast forward through here, because what I'm dealing with is just getting it all back together. So we put the tube, we make all this configuration, and then I show how to get it back in order. So I've got to make sure I've got enough wire to get things connected. On the bulb holder here, you see me with my thumb there on the left, I'm bending that in slightly so that when I put the bulb in, it puts the light about right in the middle of the numbers. And you can easily do that. You just bend that back, and it helps position it, and then you push that band back in place to hold the bulb. You don't have to get over aggressive and crimp that down too tight, just so long as it's holding it still. When you get back here, now in this situation, it's because I had so little wire to work with, you don't have to solder things first, but you could. I soldered the two smaller wires together from the motor and from the light, and then I'm going to just use the screw nut to screw them down. I could just solder all three of those together and then put the screw nut over top of it to protect it, to keep it insulated. Or you could use shrink wrap over it, or you could use tape over it. The reason they didn't solder it, again, was because they were assembling. They were trying to get the job done. And that crimp nut, listen, that crimp nut's top notch. It's sealed the deal. You saw how hard it was to get off. So they were going with what worked quickly, and I could definitely solder these together, get a really great connection, and make it happen for this clock. You've got to do with what you got. You want to do the best job you can and keep things safe. So that's what the rest of this is just me getting it all together. And ultimately we end up with a light that works pretty good. It's got a pretty good output, and it's going to serve our purpose. Again, that's the C2A. It may be hard to see on the video, but it gives plenty of good light. Definitely, like 5 times better than what was in there before. And I like that orange glow, and it's definitely enough. You don't have to see it during the day. It's on all the time. You don't have to see it during the day, but at night, when your eyes are adjusted to the dark, you can see it just fine. It doesn't hurt your eyes in the morning when you get up. Anyway, so I hope this helped, so you can see kind of the frustration you deal with when you're dealing with these clocks, how you have to kind of work it. Every clock's a little different, but ultimately, you just got to protect the wires, make sure you're not going to short out, don't take any risks, and take your time above all things. I hope this helped in some way. I'm not sure that it did, but just to give you the encouragement to try to do this and just be safe. Well, thanks for taking the time.